Our final speaker tonight is Maggie Watt.
Thank you very much. I can't tell you what an honor and a privilege it is to come and share with you all tonight some stories about my brother Don. I want to speak to Pam Buckmeyer briefly. Too, Pam, thank you, because you're the one that drew us here. Maybe a year or so ago, you invited us to start attending these sessions at the Dallas Outrageous Oral, and it's really been fun. It's been a great time for us, and we enjoy sharing this legacy that you and I have in common. When Don told me he was going to be the plaintiff, got it? When Don told me he was going to be the plaintiff in a lawsuit challenging Texas Penal Code Section 2106, my immediate reaction was a rush of excitement. This could be great. It could mean the beginning of the end of discrimination against gays and lesbians in our state. And hopefully it'll clear the way for sweeping change for the rest of our nation. In that instant, I was caught up in Don's enthusiasm. Some of you here know about that, right? After the rush, however, I was stricken for fear for Don and his safety. I thought the whole idea was great, but I preferred the plaintiff be someone else's brother. While I knew he would be an ideal candidate, the climate at that time was extremely hostile towards homosexuality, both within religious institutions and society as a whole. But Don was unwavering in his commitment and decision. He felt committed to pursue this endeavor and felt strongly that he was the one to see it through. Anything else would have been wholly uncharacteristic. To help tell this story, I'd like to talk to you about when Don first came out to me. For a period of time during the early 70s, he had begun to include in his letters to me some articles regarding some views on homosexuality that had come from theologians and mental health professionals. The views expressed in those articles differed significantly from what either of us had been taught. I was sensing what Don was trying to tell me, but essentially read them and provided very little response to him. Shortly around the first of the year, in 1975, Don came for a visit. After the children had gone to bed, we had the talk. He confided to me his certainty of his sexuality, that he was gay. He also shared with me the emotional struggles he had had over the years, trying to reconcile the views of his religious upbringing with what he began to realize was his true sexual orientation. Those conflicting feelings had at times been overwhelming. He said he spoke with ministers and counselors. He stood in prayer lines, hoping that he would be healed from what he perceived at that time to be an affliction. Over a period of time, through much soul-searching, prayer, reading of scriptures, and speaking with enlightened professionals, he finally came to a full realization and acceptance of who he was. Peace finally came to him as he loved himself, as he believed God had created him. Don then shared a passage with me, a passage from the Bible. We opened it up and we read it together. It's found in the book of Romans, and I think it speaks loudly of what he strongly believed. Who will separate us from the love of God? Trial or distress or persecution or hunger or nakedness or danger of the sword? Yet in all of this, we are more than conquerors because of him who has loved us. For neither angels nor principalities, neither the present nor the future, nor powers, neither height nor depth, nor any other creature will be able to separate us from the love of God. I think this scripture in particular was Don's creed, one that sustained him over the course of the remainder of his life. I also think that Don believed, no matter your religious beliefs, whether you are Jewish, Christian, Muslim, agnostic, or atheist, that we are all children of a mighty universe, and that as such, we have value, a purpose, a special, meaningful place on this earth, a place we are all intended to be. For as long as I could remember, I'd always admired and looked up to Don. He was my big brother. Once he came out to me that day, I realized I had much more to learn about Don, who he was, and where his newly found path would lead him. But I still admired and looked up to him. He was still my big brother. He soon came out to other family members, and their responses were varied. Both our parents, they had an unending, undying love for Don continually, but I think they sought a similar path that he had in getting guidance. They spoke with ministers, and they even spoke with a couple of physicians. The ministers weren't much help, but one of the physicians, the good old family doctor, had this straightforward, simple, brief comment that in its simplicity just spoke to my parents. And it was, he's your son. He's the same boy you've loved all your life. Just continue to love him. They took it and went with it. That's all they need. Both our parents have affirmed their continued love and devotion to Don all his life. In due time, my younger sister Judith came out. And it was great timing because Don and Judith's coming out essentially paved the way for me to tell my parents that I was going to marry a Jewish guy and convert to Judaism. Piece of cake. My wonderful and supportive husband, Howard, is here tonight. Love you, hon. But changes were taking place in the Baker house. Born and raised in Dallas, he was the second oldest of 5 children from a working middle-class family. Our father was a union sheet metal worker and a devoted family man. Our mother was a stay-at-home mom who lovingly took care of our daily needs. From an early age, he was exposed to fundamentalist Christian views and teachings, beginning with our grandfather, who was an Assembly of God minister. Both our parents taught Sunday school at various times, and we attended church services a minimum of 3 times a week, more if there was a revival. We were raised in the church, and as my mom often says, church was our life. Don, by all accounts, was a good kid. He was fun-loving and often at the helm of any exciting activities in our neighborhood. Never in trouble, but quite often not without blame. Remember a couple of instances during his high school years. This, I guess, is Don's version of being rogue. He participated and he probably organized a few times the papering of fellow classmates' homes. During that era, it was considered a status symbol. It meant you were popular. If you woke up in the morning and your house had paper, you had arrived. Neighbor kids and classmates would secretly hope they would awaken in the morning to find their homes covered in Scott tissue. The parents weren't keen on it, but the kids relished it. One other rogue moment comes to mind of Donald. One time, Don, he couldn't resist. Suddenly and unexpectedly drew open the living room window curtains as our mother was trying to peer ever so discreetly at my sister and her boyfriend on the front porch. He saw this prime moment of opportunity. Mom in the darkened room, hunched forward, barely parting the curtains and peeking out, and he seized upon it. I'm sure our mother's horrified expression was matched only by the look on my sister's face at that sudden and unexpected intrusion on her private moment. I don't recall they ever dated again. Don was an average student academically, but was well-liked and popular. He was a scout throughout much of his school years, reaching the rank of Explorer Scout. During high school, he was in track, marching band, playing the trumpet. He was in select choir and a cheerleader as well. He earned his spending money by throwing a Dallas morning newspaper route, rising at 4 each morning. He rode his bicycle first and then drove our parents' car when he was of age. Back in those days, the news carrier solicited new customers by going door to door. I remember even from those early days a certain energy that propelled him. He was so successful at selling newspaper subscriptions, he won trips to Colorado and New Orleans. Can you imagine? Really. I remember with envy all the cool gifts he received during the holidays from all his efforts as a paper boy. He got money, huge boxes of lifesavers, chewing gum, all sorts of trinkets. It was neat. Hard-working guy. After high school, he attended East Texas State University from 1965 to 1967. He then attended the University of Texas at Austin, and during this time, he spoke to a counselor about his possibility of being gay. She told him he should go into the military that would help him sort through things. So, following her advice, in 1968, he took a break from college and entered the Navy. He was stationed primarily in Germany and Guam, and I have many letters he wrote after he left home to see the big world. Wherever he went, he wrote of involvement with local church groups, often singing and touring with choirs. He was honorably discharged from the Navy in '72 and returned to the States to resume his studies in college. He received a bachelor's degree from the State of New York University in Cortland, graduating cum laude. He then returned to Dallas and eventually got his master's degree from Southern Methodist University in 1980. During his last year of life in 2000, he did further graduate work at Harvard Divinity School. In 1987, Don met Michael Hartwig, who became his life partner. They met in Dallas, but eventually moved to New England, where they relished their new surroundings and enjoyed sharing them with friends and family. They were in a loving and committed relationship for 13 years, and I will always be grateful to Michael for the degree of dedication and comfort he brought, not just to my brother, but to our entire family during Don's 7-year battle with cancer. Michael remains a cherished member of our family. By most standards, Don's life was a very normal and happy existence. Thus far, I've spoken about Don's coming out, his childhood, his academic and military careers. That brings us to the question, what made Don Baker the perfect plaintiff for the landmark case, Baker v. Wade? I'll share my thoughts now, coming from a sister. Don brought to our family and all who knew him a contagious zeal for life. He was so positive. He exuded a certain graciousness that always made us feel special. He was a kind and gentle spirit who listened intently when you spoke with him. You knew he really cared. Every celebration was enhanced by Don's presence because he loved being with his family and he loved to celebrate. It was the birth of one of his nieces or nephews, a high school graduation, a bar mitzvah, a wedding, or any important occasion. Don was there with us and for us. Typically, for many of our family celebrations, Don might orchestrate a day of songs, games, and selected poems for his nieces or nephews to read. The menu would be well planned, some that he would prepare himself. I felt he was motivated to a great extent by not only giving more joy and significance to that particular holiday or family gathering, but because he couldn't help himself. It seemed innate in him to enhance any event and bring people closer together. The real treat was when you were the honored guest of Don's and Mike's. Being their guest meant being treated like royalty. On a trip my family took to Boston, Dawn met us at the airport with gifts in hand. A stuffed toy lobster for Sarah, a Boston t-shirt for Jacob, and a bouquet of Texas yellow roses for his sister, me. The rest of the trip only got better. With an itinerary designed by Dawn, of course, we were treated to the highlights of the magnificent and historic city of Boston. We went on tours, tasted New England cuisine, and sailed on the Charles River. He made sure our children received their history lessons for most everything we did. He quizzed them on the historic highlights of the trip and then asked them to write something that they had done that day. Our children became his eager students. We were treated to a week we will never forget. Don made his mark on our trip as he did on everything he pursued. In many of the letters Don sent me over the years, his genuine love of people is evident throughout the lines he has written. One such letter he wrote to me in 1975 reflects this love, which is heavily influenced by his personal beliefs. While on winter break from a student teaching in New York, he toured with a college choir. The tour included staying in the homes of host families. "What a beautiful way to meet people," he exclaimed. "The experience never seems to grow old. People continue to fascinate me, and it is no wonder that God continues to love us." And he says, "I know that may sound a little egotistical and snobbish. It's not that people deserve God's love. It's just that they do have good qualities, and with determination and self-fulfillment, they can be beautiful creatures. Sometimes I think evangelicals emphasize the degradation and utter worthlessness of a man in an attempt to explain God's love, to an extent that man accepts his mistakes and unproductiveness as normal. I don't believe that's God's intention. I believe man has much more worth and value than he gives himself credit for. I think too much pessimism can cause humans to get in a non-productive rut that only breeds more unproductiveness and defeat. With a determination and strong will, I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me." That's from Philippians 4:13. In that same letter, Don says he's been in contact with a national director of Christ Ambassadors, an Assembly of God youth organization, concerning more thoughts on the gay issue. Don states that they have had several recent serious discussions. "Unfortunately," he says, "Mr. G and I are still miles apart on our opinions, but I'm still trusting God that soon our ideas will be drawn closer together." Don was using his conciliatory manner. He was attempting to foster understanding and change within his own denomination. His faith and beliefs were always central to his life. From his love of learning and of people to his infectious and warm spirit, it is no surprise that Don was a natural teacher. As an elementary school teacher in Dallas, teaching language arts and social studies, he was truly in his element. He created a learning environment in his classroom that would be the envy of any teacher. His classroom had flower boxes built by our father, in which the children planted and cared for geraniums and other flowers. There was a designated sitting area with comfortable chairs to entice the children to read many of the materials he had brought back from his extensive travels while in the military. He also had a hamster and aquarium that the kids would help care for. He was the kind of teacher parents hoped their child would have. During his tenure as a teacher, Don was becoming more politically active in the Dallas scene. He was becoming more visible, and it was only a matter of time before he would be outed to the general public. Dallas School Superintendent Nolan Estes declared there were no gay teachers in the Dallas School District, but if there were, they would be fired immediately. Former Dallas School Board trustee and state representative, the Honorable Dr. Harriet Earhart, witnessed these decisive moments for Don firsthand. She reminisced about such moments in her eulogy of Don in 2000. She said, The superintendent's intention was to immediately rid the district of a group of teachers based on what the students or parents might report was a non-traditional lifestyle, one not acceptable to some of the community. Don, in a silhouetted TV interview with an electronically distorted voice to protect his identity, pointed out the significance of such an ill-conceived idea. We met personally the next morning, he a teacher in one room, and I a member of the DIS board in another, talking through a door. Very shortly, Don burst through the door and said, "I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to hide anymore." She goes on to say, "I understand and have seen what it is to come out." Don talked with a group that was concerned about the superintendent's directive and mapped a course that was the starting point of making DISD what it is today, the most non-discriminating district, the only one barring discrimination of its students or its staff. She says, Don started that in Texas. Dr. Earhart herself played a significant and crucial role in all the positive changes that transpired during that time. Don always had the utmost respect and admiration for her. He was surrounded by many supportive and loyal individuals throughout his days in Dallas. Many remained dear friends with Don until his last days. Many here this evening. I would like to recount to you some more comments from Dr. Earhart's and others' eulogies from Don's funeral that I feel articulate so well how others and I felt about Don. Dr. Earhart said, "Many we meet change us, most ever so slightly. But in the course of one's life, only a few have such a significant influence that they turn around our whole existence. Few change the entire direction of our future." In his eulogy of Don, longtime and close friend Gary Springer stated, "I've often said that Don Baker was the only person I knew who had delusions of grandeur and then made those delusions come true." He created in many of us a sense of excitement and hope for the future. Don also had a vision of how the church would be enriched by becoming inclusive to gays and lesbians. In 1977, he convinced 2 local mainline churches to sponsor a conference on homosexuality and the church. He recruited a well-known theologian, Dr. Norman Pittenger, as the keynote speaker, and created thought-provoking educational sessions throughout the conference. Gary says this was 1977, and it was a revolutionary event. It was also the beginning of these 2 sponsoring churches. Midway Hills Christian Church and North Haven Methodist Church are open and affirming, welcoming congregations to gay and lesbian persons. Amen. Yes. It was my husband, Howie, and my privilege to attend the recent marriage ceremony of Gary and his husband, Sonny, in one of those very congregations, Midway Hills Christian Church. Gary and Sonny tied the legal knot after over 40 years in a committed relationship. Yes, yes. It was a thrilling and unforgettable moment when everyone in the sanctuary rose in unison, each of our hearts reaching out and embracing them as they proceeded down the aisle to recite their vows to each other. I could sense Don's presence there, right then and there, reveling in that awesome moment. Close friend, Dr. Louise Young, characterized Don as a visionary. In her eulogy, she said, "The 18th century German philosopher Johann von Goethe offers us advice that to me describes Don's approach as an activist to dealing with people, particularly those who do not agree with us. Goethe says, if you treat an individual as he is, he will stay as he is. But if you treat him as if he were what he ought to be and could be, he will become what he ought to be and he could be. I've spent the last several minutes sharing with you my many personal memories and thoughts about Don. I hope I've shed some light on some of the factors and events that came together that eventually led to him becoming the plaintiff in Baker v. Wade. However, this story cannot be complete without mentioning another very significant individual. If my brother was the perfect plaintiff, Judge Jerry Buckmeyer was the perfect judge. A trailblazer and true visionary himself, he had the courage and insight to influence major change. He saw where there are inequities and injustices in our society, and using powers vested to him through the courts, delivered rulings that were far-reaching. When the courses of Buckmeyer and Baker came together, when they converged, a phenomenal occurrence took place. Judge Buckmeyer laid the groundwork for future rulings and victories regarding gay and lesbian rights. In closing, Don's personality, upbringing, courage, and dedication to pursue justice, coupled with Judge Jerry Buckmeyer's determination, idealism, and progressive thinking, will continue to influence and to be a lesson from which present and future generations can learn. Thank you.